When I received the call about my great-uncle Edward's passing, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and relief. Edward had been a reclusive man, a shadowy figure who lived alone in the crumbling mansion on the outskirts of town. I hadn't seen him since I was a child, but his legend loomed large in our family lore, a man of mysterious habits and rumored dark practices. The house, they said, held secrets too terrible to tell. My wife, Claire, and our two children, Emily and Jake, accompanied me to the old mansion to sort through Edward's belongings. The house stood like a sentinel against the backdrop of dark, brooding woods, its windows opaque with dust, and its facade weathered by years of neglect. As we stepped inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay. Among the many curiosities and relics we found was an old painting, hidden away in the attic. It was a large, ornate portrait of a stern-looking man with piercing blue eyes that seemed to follow you wherever you moved. The brass plaque at the bottom read, "Jonathan Blackwood, 1845. "Who is that?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. "An ancestor, I suppose," I replied, though I had never heard of him before. We decided to take the painting home, thinking it might hold some historical value. We hung it in the living room, its dark, somber presence contrasting sharply with our modern decor. Almost immediately, we began to notice strange occurrences. At first, it was subtle. The feeling of being watched, a chill in the air, the sensation of the eyes in the painting tracking our every move. Claire laughed it off as a trick of the light, but the children were unnerved. Jake refused to be alone in the room with it, and Emily complained of nightmares featuring the stern man in the portrait. One night, I was sitting alone in the living room reading when I heard a faint whisper. I looked around, expecting to see one of the kids, but the room was empty. I glanced at the painting, and for a split second, I could have sworn Jonathan Blackwood's expression had changed, a faint, sinister smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I shook off the feeling and went to bed, but the sense of unease lingered. Over the next few days, the disturbances escalated. Objects moved on their own. Books fell from shelves, chairs slid across the floor, and lights flickered without explanation. The whispers grew louder, often indistinguishable but filled with malice. One evening, as we sat down to dinner, the portrait's eyes seemed to glow with an unnatural light. The air grew colder, and a palpable sense of dread settled over us. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging us into darkness. Claire screamed, and the children huddled close to us, trembling with fear. I fumbled for a flashlight, and with shaking hands managed to turn it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the portrait. To our horror, the figure in the painting was no longer confined to the canvas. Jonathan Blackwood stood in our living room, his ghostly form flickering like a candle flame. "Leave this house," he intoned, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "You do not belong here." The next few moments were a blur of terror and confusion. We fled the house, barely pausing to grab our essentials. As we drove away, the mansion loomed behind us, its windows glowing with an eerie light. We checked into a hotel for the night, too frightened to return home. The next morning, I contacted a local historian, hoping to learn more about Jonathan Blackwood and the painting's origins. What I discovered was more horrifying than I could have imagined. Jonathan Blackwood had been a notorious occultist in the 19th century, rumored to have dabbled in dark magic and human sacrifices. His obsession with immortality had led him to create the painting as a vessel for his spirit, allowing him to escape death and live on through the ages. Determined to rid ourselves of the cursed portrait, we returned to the mansion with the historian and a local priest, The priest performed an exorcism, chanting prayers and sprinkling holy water over the painting. The room grew colder, and the painting shook violently, as if resisting the exorcism. Finally, with a deafening crack, the canvas split down the middle, and the spectral form of Jonathan Blackwood emerged, screaming in fury, before dissolving into a wisp of smoke. The house fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as the spirit was banished. We burned the remnants of the painting, ensuring it could never haunt anyone again. With the curse lifted, we were able to sell the mansion and move on with our lives, but the experience left an indelible mark on our family. To this day, I can still feel those piercing blue eyes watching me from the shadows, a reminder of the darkness that once sought to claim us. The memory of Jonathan Blackwood and his malevolent spirit haunts my dreams, a chilling testament to the evil that lurks just beyond the veil of our understanding. The day I acquired the portrait, a thick mist hung over the coastal town of Harrow's End. It arrived at my antique shop, cradled in the arms of a trembling old man, his eyes darting nervously as he laid it on the counter. "It's called the Gaze of Prosperity," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It brings wealth, they say, but at a price." The painting depicted a stern woman in Victorian garb, her eyes piercingly vivid, as if she were about to step out of the canvas. Despite the eerie quality, I was mesmerized. The frame was ornate, gilded, and the craftsmanship alone would fetch a good price. Ignoring the old man's warnings of madness and misery, I purchased the portrait. That very evening, I hung it above the fireplace in my shop, admiring how the flickering light played upon the woman's face, lending her an almost lifelike quality. Within a week, my fortunes turned. A rare collection I had long sought fell into my lap for an absurdly low price, and customers flooded in, as if drawn by an unseen force. Yet, as business thrived, unease began to creep into my bones. At night, I would wake to the sensation of being watched. The portrait seemed to glare at me from across the room, her eyes following every move. Then the whispers started, soft, insidious, always from the direction of the painting. I would spin around, expecting to confront someone, but there was never anyone there. Just the woman in the portrait, her expression ever so slightly amused. I decided to sell it, eager to be rid of its malevolent presence. A collector from the city, intrigued by the rumors of its properties, bought it for a handsome sum. I sighed in relief as I packaged it away, hopeful that the whispers and the watchful eyes were gone for good. But prosperity has a way of ensnaring one in its golden clutches. My business faltered as soon as the portrait left. Superstition gnawed at my logic. Driven by desperation, I tracked down the collector, only to find him gibbering madly, locked in his mansion. The portrait, he claimed, wouldn't let him sleep, wouldn't stop talking. He begged me to take it back. Unable to bear the man's tortured state, I reclaimed the portrait and returned it to its place above the fireplace. Almost instantly, my shop's fortunes reversed. But now the whispers were louder, more demanding. They infiltrated my thoughts, dictating my actions, chaining me to the shop day and night. I became obsessed with the woman in the painting. Research revealed her to be Lady Elizabeth Harrow, a wealthy widow from the 1800s, known for her ruthless tactics to maintain her fortune. Her husband and subsequent lovers had all succumbed to madness, driven insane by her relentless ambition and eerie presence. One stormy night, driven to the brink of my own sanity, I hurled the portrait into the fireplace. The flames leapt up greedily, but as the fire consumed her image, Lady Elizabeth's face contorted into a scream, and the entire room filled with the sound of her fury. The fire blazed unnaturally, nearly engulfing the shop before the portrait finally succumbed to ash. The silence that followed was profound. My shop survived, though business never returned to its former glory. But sometimes, when the wind howls down the chimney, I hear her whispers, faint but unyielding, reminding me that prosperity comes at a price that may yet claim my sanity. We never meant to keep the old television after moving into the grandfather's house, a relic from the early 90s tucked away in the den. It was supposed to go out with the next haul to the dump, but with unpacking and the kids starting new schools, it just never happened. Instead, it sat like a dormant beast among boxes of lesser memories. The first time it turned on by itself, we thought it was just faulty wiring, a quirk of old tech. Static hissed through its speakers, filling the room with a soft, persistent crackle as the screen lit up with flickering gray. I meant to unplug it, I really did, but life's distractions are many. Then one evening, as I passed by the den, a whisper seeped from the static. My name, Michael, it said, so faint I was sure I had imagined it. I shook it off, attributing it to the stress and sleep deprivation that came with a new job and a new home. But then it happened again, and this time, my wife heard it too. Michael, the static whispered, louder this time, more insistent. We stared at the screen, hearts pounding, as a cold draft swept through the room. Days passed, and nothing more happened. We joked nervously about it, trying to bury our unease under layers of humor and mundane concerns. That is until the next name came. Sarah, our neighbor 2 doors down. We learned of her sudden passing the next day. A chill settled in my bones, one I couldn't shake. After Sarah, we started to take notes. Each name emerged from the static, a ghostly roll call. And without fail, news of each named person's death followed. Accidents, sudden illnesses, unexplained tragedies. The television, once an innocuous household fixture, had become a harbinger of death. We couldn't just dispose of it. What if it was our names next? So I began researching, digging into the television's past and that of my grandfather. It turned out he had dabbled in more than just amateur radio and old films. He was part of a clandestine group that explored the fringes of science and the paranormal. The television, according to his journals, was part of an experiment, a conduit designed to tap into something unseen, unheard, something that existed in the static between things. Armed with this knowledge, I tried to destroy the TV, but each attempt left me drained, sick, as if the act of trying to silence it was physically harming me. It seemed connected to us, or we to it, bound by some unseen thread. The whispers grew louder, more frequent. Names of people we knew, names of strangers, all met with untimely ends, until one night, as a storm raged outside, a new name crackled through the static. It was my son's name, Joshua. Panicked, I grabbed the television, yanking wires and smashing the screen with the fireplace poker. Sparks flew, glass shattered, and the whispers turned to screams, angry, agonized. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, silence fell. The storm outside ceased, and the air cleared. We waited, breath held, days then weeks. No ill came to Joshua, no accidents, no sudden sickness. It seemed in my desperation I had broken the connection, silenced the whispers for good. But the price was steep. The static had not gone quietly. In its death throes, it had revealed one final name, my own. As I write this, I know I am living on borrowed time. I can still hear a faint hissing, like static, in the silence of the night, whispering my name over and over. I leave this account as a warning. Beware the voices in the static, for they are not bound by our understanding of life and death. And once heard, they never really leave. When my wife, Ellen, and I first toured the old farmhouse nestled on the edge of Greenvale, it felt like stepping back in time. Its charm was undeniable, with creaking floorboards and the musty smell of history seeping through its walls. Buying it was a dream come true. Renovating it, however, opened a chapter we hadn't anticipated. It was Ellen who discovered the hidden room. While replacing the rotten kitchen floorboards, she called out to me, her voice echoing with a mix of excitement and bewilderment. "James, come look at this!" Beneath the last plank, there was a hatch. We pried it open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Fetching our flashlights, we ventured down, the air growing colder with each step. What we found was astonishing. A classroom, untouched since the 1950s, preserved as if in a time capsule. There were rows of wooden desks, each with a child's belongings neatly arranged. Faded notebooks, pencils worn down to nubs, and at the front, a large blackboard covered in dust. The date on the board read, May 4th, 1952. Curiosity piqued, we began to sift through the artifacts. Each desk told a story of a child who once sat there. One desk in particular caught my attention. It had a small, leather-bound diary. The entries were mundane at first, but as the pages turned, a sense of unease crept over me. The final entry was chilling. "I don't want to go back down there. Mrs. Carter says we mustn't tell anyone about the lessons." I showed Ellen, and her face paled. "Do you think something happened to these kids?" she whispered. We decided to look up the property's history, learning that it once served as a schoolhouse before being converted into a farmhouse. But there was no record of any teacher named Mrs. Carter or what happened to the children after 1952. That night, we heard the first noises. The sound of chalk scrawling across a board drifted up from the hidden room. We lay in bed, wide-eyed, clutching each other's hands, listening to the echoes of a lesson being taught below. By morning, our resolve had hardened. We needed answers. Descending into the basement once more, we found the blackboard changed. Written in neat, cursive script was a new message. "Please, let us go." The local priest agreed to visit after hearing our story. His face grew solemn as he took in the room. "There's a presence here," he said, sprinkling holy water over the desks. "An imprint of past events. You must find peace for these souls." We followed his advice, inviting a team of paranormal investigators and historians. Through their research, they uncovered a grim truth. In the 1950s, Mrs. Carter was a governess who taught forbidden knowledge to the children, delving into dark rituals. The townsfolk, upon discovering this, sealed the room, trapping the essence of the events within. The investigators conducted a cleansing ritual, urging the trapped spirits to move on. As the ceremony concluded, the air shifted, lightening, as if a weight had been lifted. Since then, the noises have ceased, and the classroom remains a silent testament to its eerie history. We've decided to preserve it, a museum of sorts, to honor the memory of the children and the lessons they never got to finish. Ellen and I occasionally stand at the top of those stairs, listening. The classroom remains silent, but the lesson we learned will never be forgotten. Some rooms are sealed for a reason, and some histories are best left undisturbed.